Okie dokie everyone, I'm just going to give you a quick demo on how to use Photoshop to think about your layout. We're going to be focusing on outcome today, but this applies to all of your slides, and so your research slides, idea development, all need to be approached in this same way. The reason we're working in Photoshop is because we need to make use of the tools that are in here, so the rulers, guides and grids. They're not available to us in PowerPoint, and so it doesn't allow us to have the same professional approach to presentation as it does on Photoshop. So what I would suggest you do is produce your slide layouts in Photoshop, save that as an entire image, a single page, and then drag and drop that image into your PowerPoint slide to hand in. So I'm going to give you a quick demo using 3 pieces of work from a student last year as an example. So I've just dragged those onto my Photoshop document. I've got a blue close-up detail sample, a pink close-up detail sample, and then my final outcome. Remember that the exam brief tells us we can have some detailed shots, and so we need to use that opportunity. If we've got a garment with a detail of a pocket or an interesting collar, if we've got an item that's multifunctional, we need to show all of the functions in it. We need to show all of the texture, all of the detail that we can, so that we're showing our work to the best of our ability. The examiner will only be able to see what you give them, and they will only be able to see it on a slide on a PowerPoint document. So we need to try and show them as much as we can, as if we were holding it in front of their face and saying, look at this bit of my garment, look at this bit of my garment. We need to show them everything we can. So I've got my main outcome. I'm going to keep that a bit larger because it's the main focus of my page. And then my 2 detailed shots are the supplementary information, so I'm going to keep those smaller. But my first thing as a designer when I look at it is that they're all different sizes and we need to try and keep some consistency. And so I need to try and make at least my 2 samples the same size so that they work together. So the first thing I'm going to do is move them on top of each other so I've got a guide for my size, and I'm going to increase the size of my blue sample so that it's the same width as my pink sample. Okay, this now tells me that my blue sample isn't as long as my pink sample, and so I need to think about 2 things. Number 1, I either need to crop them so that they're the same size. If we're going to edit any of our images in Photoshop, if you remember back to when we worked on the design development in fashion, anytime we bring a new element into Photoshop, we need to rasterize it. So if we go to Layer, Rasterize, All Layers, this will give us editable images to work on. So back to the 2 options. Option 1 is that we change the size of the images so that they're the same. Option 2, which I'll talk to you about in a second, is that we play around with layout so it looks more consistent. So if we're going to go with option 1, we're going to need to select the pink element that is overhanging and delete it. So if you draw a marquee tool that goes up to the blue box, select your pink layer and press the delete button, I can now separate them out and have them at the same size and use them in my layout as a regular shape. If we go back a little bit, so I'm going to undo my last moves and work with 2 images that are of different sizes. So you might be in a position where you can't work with images that are the same size, and so I want to talk to you about how to approach that. So the important thing when we're approaching images of different sizes is that we keep at least one element consistent. And in our case, the element that we can keep consistent is the negative space that is between them. And so the negative space here between the blue and the pink, and the negative space between the samples and the outcome needs to be the same, because that allows our eye to travel across the image and focus on the key details with ease. If we've got an image that is randomly laid out, has different size negative space in between it, it looks cluttered and busy and our eye doesn't travel easily across the image. We need to make it as clean and professional as possible, and we need to make it as easy for the examiner as we can to look at our work. So if we think about these distances that we've got a nice equal distance going on between these 2 elements and my main outcome, but what I haven't got is a nice distance going on here at the bottom. If I draw a marquee around these and line it up with the outside edges of my images, we've got a bit of extra negative space going on at the bottom of the pink. We need to eradicate that. So if we use our guides now to help us, let me get rid of that. So We use our guides to help us. We can make a layout plan for our work. If you click on your ruler at the top, it will create a guideline for us if we keep our mouse held down. So if I keep scrolling down onto my page and then let go when I hit the top of my work, it creates a turquoise line for me to work from. This is almost like an invisible pencil line, which is allowing us to lay out our page that we can get rid of when we've finished. I now need to draw another one at the bottom so that I've got a guideline for where my work needs to finish. If I zoom in, so Command plus on a Mac, I'll be able to see more clearly what I'm trying to do. And so what I'm trying to do, my aim of the game, is to take my pink image and make it the same size as the outcome image so that they line up in the same place. I know though if I just do that with my pink image that my blue image will now be out of scale with it. And so I need to select them both and do them both at the same time. So I'm going to zoom out, stretch them until my bounding box, so the black transform box which is around my images that I'm moving now, turns red. And so if you notice really carefully, when I hit the turquoise line, the bottom line of my bounding box has turned red, and that means that it's bob on, that it's in exactly the right place to be touching that guideline. And so Photoshop has given me a helping hand in making sure everything's lined up properly. I'm now going to zoom out, which is Command minus on my Mac, and check that my distances are still the same. They look pretty okay. Maybe the two samples need to be nudged in a tiny bit. Okay, so now I've used those guidelines. I don't want them anymore. So I go to View and then click on Clear Guides, and that gets rid of them for me. The last major elephant in the room is that we're not centered in the page. And so I'm going to draw a box around all of my objects using the black arrow tool, and then I'm going to move them into the center of my image. Photoshop is going to help me out again because it gives me this pink vertical line when we're centered. So I've got my image centralized. I might want to think about being a bit more consistent. I might want to think that the negative space around the edge is much bigger than the negative space in between the images. And so if I select all of my objects and increase the size, I've got a bit more of a balanced image. Alternatively, I might want to literally make a bigger space in between them. Oops, I've not highlighted that one. Let's go back. Highlight the pink. So if I reduce them all down in size again, and then increase the space in between my samples and my outcome, I'm left with a smaller space in between my samples than everything else. So I'm going to increase that so that it's the same size, which tells me that I need to increase my outcome too, so that it fits in with the rest of my images. If I highlight them all now and pop it back into the center, I've got a more even distribution of negative space and my eye travels a bit easier over the image. This is a square grid because I've got all of my elements lined up in what is essentially a collage together square, and they're acting as one image. We could also think about layout options which use a linear format, so we could think about twisting our items. Go back and do that with my scale. Twisting our items so that they're in a different orientation and then making them larger so that they fit together. So they're all the same height now, and we need to play around with how they're laid out to create an equal layout. So we could create a stripe going across our page. We could increase the negative space so that we've got some negative space between the images. This gives us a loss of image on the side. You can see that I've got this marquee which is showing me that some of my image is missing. We might want to think about scaling all of our images down so that they fit onto the page. and we've got all of our details on there. We might want to create a layout which creates a stripe going from top to bottom. So in the same way, we can play around with the negative space, play around with our layout to create something which creates a different visual line. If you're going to go for something completely random, I would suggest that you need to have completely random shapes. And so if you're going to create something that has just randomly spaced images, so we've got our images just scattered about our page, this never tends to work very well when we've got a regular shape. And so I will be thinking about if you've got raw edge samples for textiles, for example, or you've got some circular shapes, they would work quite well in an irregular layout. If we've got regular rectangular shapes, we're going to need to keep it consistent and within a grid format.